of young people worldwide will call Africa home by 2100. But if we don't pick up the pace on the SDGs, with only 15% of the goals currently on track, we'll miss the boat completely to turn our world around for the better. The more we wait, the more we hesitate to do the right thing, the more we see people turn away from democratic institutions intended to deliver for them. This is increasingly clear as young people become more frustrated with the status quo. With this urgency, our generation, young and old, must be humanity's first generation to choose a future that we can be proud of. That starts with investing in young people and young countries for the benefit of all generations, current and future. What makes 2024 so super unique is that upcoming elections worldwide will measure the power of young people's engagement and their influence on the world. As we look across the year, we will experience an election year like no other. 2 billion young people worldwide are voting. That's 6 times the population of the United States alone. It's the ultimate global election showdown, the ultimate test of democracy. Each country shaded red in this map represents not just a place, but people, the majority of whom are young people like you and on the brink of making decisions that will change the course of their countries and our collective future. Now let's zoom in deeper into India to see these dynamics in action. With 210 million young voters, including 20 million first-time voters, we're not just talking about numbers here. We're talking about a generation ready to make their mark on the world's largest democracy. These young voters bring with them a tide of concerns and priorities that are reshaping the conversation in India. From living costs, education, jobs, women's security, these aren't just talking points on the SDGs. They're real experiences that touch the lives of millions. As young Indians take pride in their nation's role in global diplomacy across platforms like the United Nations and G20, they also understand the gravity of their choices, not just for India, but for the world. The ripple effect of their collective decision will be felt far beyond India's borders. But there's a compelling piece to this story. 82 million young Indians did not vote in the last election, a figure that mirrors new young voters in that election. To put this in perspective, imagine filling the Modi Stadium, the world's largest arena, with young Indians not voting 621 times over. Or perhaps consider young Indians not voting to the size of the entire population of Germany. Not voting for young Indians is as common or as popular as all the Philosopher's Stone Harry Potter books sold worldwide. Each of these non-voters has a story, a reason for their silence, a barrier to their participation, and it's incumbent upon us to listen and understand these stories, to address the hurdles that keep them from engaging in the very fabric of their nation's future. This is the very source of inspiration for the Engine Room, to unlock the power and potential of young people worldwide. As we take in these insights, we're reminded that the power of democracy lies not only in the hands of those who cast votes, but also in the power that lies in the hands of the young. It's a global call for greater inclusion, greater engagement, greater representation of young people, from the national level all the way up to the UN. As I sit here today, I can't help but feel a sense of solidarity with every young person who will mark a ballot for the first time. They are not just voters. They are designers of the future. You hold in your hands the tools to build a world that reflects your hopes, your dreams, your power for a better world. With this insight, we turn our focus to a cornerstone of global cooperation, the United Nations itself, and the upcoming Summit of the Future in September this year. The Summit of the Future is a system-wide upgrade by the Secretary General, responding to a global call for a UN fit for 21st century needs. The summit is set to adopt a pact for the future, an agreement negotiated by governments worldwide. The pact includes a set of chapters that you see on this slide that represent the core pillars of this vision, including sections dedicated to young people and future generations. Every chapter, every annex, including the declaration for future generations, is a step closer to the world we dream of. We've worked with leaders from the world's largest youth organizations and young people worldwide to influence and share what should be in the pact for the last 2 years. As leaders continue to negotiate the text, we've launched a youth survey that will ensure your voice is heard and influence the process even well beyond the Summit of the Future. The Engine Room Youth Survey is more than just a simple act of filling out questions. It's an opportunity to have your voice heard on what solutions could and can make a huge difference in your life and the lives of young people worldwide. The survey poses questions that consider concrete solutions like, should we tax luxury goods to fund community projects, just like France did? Or should we fund young leaders and innovators, just like Kickstarter did with its worldwide creators? Or do we need a global UN advocate for future generations, just like Wales when it nominated its own for its own country? This survey will help build a learning agenda for how to build the 2100 roadmap. Think of the learning agenda as a blueprint, similar to a guide for assembling IKEA furniture. It's a simple, easy to follow guide for building the 2100 roadmap, engineered by leading minds and young change makers like you engaged in the engine room. As we build this learning agenda, it's so vital to dive deep into the dreams and hopes of young people and young countries through mechanisms like the Summit of the Future and the youth survey that we've launched. We will also spotlight the major hurdles facing our next and future generations, using the SDGs as a lens to blaze a path that leaves no generation behind. Finally, we will delve into the stories and insights behind the global agreements like the SDGs that have changed the course of history to design a 2100 roadmap that will change the course of humanity. In closing, I urge each of you to engage, to imagine, and to be bold. Let's build this 2100 learning agenda with the conviction and courage that every young voice matters, that all generations working together can rise to meet the challenges of our time. As I wrap up, I'm so thrilled to introduce the next session led by Saru, our very own Next Generation Fellow for Jobs, to lead a conversation on meeting the demands of the 21st century. Get ready to be inspired by visionaries whose work are not just defining our world today, but also charting the course for future generations. Saru, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Harshani. It is so great to be here with everybody today. I'm so excited for this. As Harshani mentioned, my name is Saru. I am one of the Next Generation Fellows working on jobs with the UN Foundation. And we have a fantastic lineup, really a dream team here to discuss how we can raise our ambitions, our actions to meet those demands, the changing shifts that Harshani just mentioned. I think for me, it can feel really overwhelming, even as a child of this century. You know, I struggle to keep up with the pace of everything I need to know to shape the future. So many climate reports and demographic shifts, and hearing from global citizens that are working on this, like those we have today, it reminds me that we're not in this alone. We don't need to feel overwhelmed. We actually are part of like this massive global team that we don't often see that's going to help to deliver the win on all of these priorities with us. And so I'm going to have the honor of introducing some of those teammates, really team captains, actually. They're leading and championing progress to transform our world for that better future that we all want. And please, just a reminder as we enter the panel to please send all your thoughts, reactions, especially your questions in the chat. We're going to bring them up in the Q&A at the end, and so you'll have a chance to directly engage. First of all, let me introduce Melody Wyson. She is a world-renowned changemaker and speaker who has opened the stage for President Barack Obama at the Ziggo Dome. She's moderated National Geographic Sustainability Week in Bangkok, and she's also just signed a book deal with HarperCollins, so much more to come. Other accomplishments including speaking at the UN, co-chairing the World Economic Forum GPAP Committee, sitting on the inaugural expert advisory panel for the Earthshot Prize, and her film, Bigger Than Us, premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. So you can see her on all platforms. She's building on 10 years of advocacy and continuing to share what she learned since the age of 12 in classrooms, boardrooms, and world stages through her company, Youthtopia. You should definitely check them out, and maybe someone can send in the chat. Jake Oben-Bediako is our next speaker. He is currently the Presidential Coordinator for Youth Engagement and Strategy, as well as the Global Youth Ambassador for Diaspora Affairs in the Office of the Presidency in Ghana. Jake has extensive experience in connecting governments, global brands, organizations with African youth and diaspora audiences. In his current role in the Office of the President, he develops special engagement strategies, evidence of his expertise in designing and implementing high-impact initiatives. And this is seen in the outcomes of Ghana's 2019 Year of Return initiative that I hope we hear more about, and the 2022 Global Citizen Festival in Accra. Jake is a lawyer by training, and he has degrees from the University of Cambridge and Columbia University. Just to keep the train of absolutely impressive accomplishments going, we have Grace Forrest as our next speaker. Grace is a human rights activist and founding director of Walk Free, one of the world's leading anti-slavery organizations. Walk Free produces the Global Slave Index you may have seen. It's the world's most comprehensive data set on modern slavery and campaigns for systemic change against this abuse of human rights. In 2023, Grace was appointed to the Global Commission on Modern Slavery and Human Trafficking. She was the United Nations Australia's youngest ever Goodwill Ambassador and Young Australian of the Year for Western Australia in 2021, and she is not slowing down. And finally, we have Leila Hasanova. She is the Youth Climate Champion for COP29 Azerbaijan. She's earned a bachelor's degree in international studies, a master's degree in public administration from ADA University, and she's also participated in an academic exchange program in politics and international relations at Kadir Has University in Turkey. Currently, Leila is also serving as the head of the secretariat at NAM Youth Organization. So already, so much inspiration hearing everything you all have done. I want to jump right into our discussion and really get into the nitty-gritty, starting with you, Jake, if I may. And drawing from your incredible experience working with the government of Ghana and also global organizations to engage young Africans. We just heard Africa's median age is 19, 70% of the population is under 30. So how do you see the evolving landscape of leadership and decision-making in Africa? Over to you, Jake.
Fantastic. So can everyone hear me okay? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for having me. That was a pretty glowing review of a few years of work, so thank you for that. Definitely sounds better than I actually am in person, but it's great. Yeah, so I really love this conversation. I love anything to do with talking about young people and talking about the future, because a lot of people like to say young people are the future, but I like to argue that young people are the present. And we are actually meant to be shaping the future for future young people. So our work is urgent and our work starts now. It's not something that we wait for older generations to give us the reins on, because by that time it's almost too late. So I'm happy to see young people like us gathering at such early stages of our lives to take action and to make sure that we are designing the world that we want to inherit and the world that we want to pass on. With regards to your question, particularly when it comes to decision-making in Africa, I happen to work in an African government, which has been the joy of my life, really, and seeing how we've had to gradually make that shift from making decisions for young people to making decisions with young people. Bringing young people to the decision-making table is the most important thing. I think it's a very easy strategy to implement. And I'm happy to see that organizations like the African Union have, taken that on quite strongly with, the African Union Youth Envoy, formerly Aya Chebi, who did a project around intergenerational co-leadership, which still guides a lot of the African Union youth engagements now. And currently, Chido Mpemba is doing trailblazing work around the world and on the continent, trying to unite the African youth voice. But also, governments can do this individually as well. Like in right now, we've seen the rise of roles like mine, which is youth advisor to presidents, which is extremely important because you would be surprised in Africa if you look at the average age of our leaders and you look at the average age of population, you realize there's a big discrepancy. So there's that need for young people to step in and be at these big decision-making tables. I cannot tell you the number of times I have been the only person under 35 at a decision-making table, yet decisions are being made for the future. Decisions are being made for the future that the 80-year-old or the 70-something-year-old, no offense to them, is not actually going to be there to reap the benefits or suffer the consequences for. So it's important that we create space for young people to be at these decision-making tables. And so that's something that I've seen so many governments. The government of Namibia started it. The government of Uganda has a youth advisor. Ghana, myself, I'm a youth advisor to the president. And also I've recently discovered that Botswana has added one. And this is a simple thing that governments across the continent can do to ensure that at least there is a youth voice at the decision-making table. Youth voices do not only need to be heard in protests or at, in alternative advocacy. It can also really be at the decision-making to be more proactive so that process can happen and things can occur. But even with those, we are having more high-level conversations and not just basic things that, because people are out of touch, they are not able to touch on immediately and get working on. So I think that's a very key aspect to bringing young people to the decision-making table. And it's something that governments can implement today. Any sitting governments can decide to hire a youth advisor, somebody who is representative of the kind of the demographics of the country and the kind of youth that they are trying to develop within the country. It's extremely important.
That's amazing to hear. And you're too humble, so it makes me feel better. But yeah, young people are the present. The work is urgent. The work starts now. I think also giving us those simple strategies that any government could put in place. There's no reason why tomorrow a government couldn't, put in place a youth advisor. There's no reason they couldn't sort of shift in policy to making decisions with young people rather than for them, setting up these systems. Really easy, and it kind of tells us where to push our own governments forwards. I want to go next to you, Layla. You have invaluable experience in negotiating outcomes between leaders and fostering intergenerational dialogue, especially as the youth climate champion for COP29. Incredibly impressive. So it would be so important to hear from you. What skills do you believe are most important for leaders to tackle future challenges facing current and future generations, especially as many countries this year go into elections?
Thank you, Saru. Very impressive and very lovely introduction. Thank you all, and my pleasure to meet you all here. Would like to start with some of the highlights that I want to share with you. So the challenges we face from the COVID-19 pandemic to the escalating climate crisis underscore the urgent need for all of us for collective action and global solidarity. As the Youth Climate Champion for COP29, representing the vibrant nation of Azerbaijan, I'm deeply honored to address this esteemed panel and gathering. Positioned at the crossroads of the world, we are here to serve as a pivotal bridge between East and West. Central to our mission in the establishment of new approaches to climate change problems, we as a nation and as the whole world together want to make sure that we involve as much youth as possible. It is to make sure that the process is very inclusive, that youth actually have a right and have voice to participate in the real negotiation process that is happening in the COP process. As we may all know, COP is it's a conference of the parties. It's half politics and half negotiations and just a little bit of climate. Many just focus on that as a climate, but many just skip the information that it's politics. So young leaders who want to really make sure that they are able to make change, they should be trying to strive and learn more about the process itself, what it has, and how can we as youth make sure that our voice is heard there, because our generation is at stake and we are the ones who will make a change and who will lead the world for the better, hopefully. As we look ahead to COP29, I want to make sure that we reaffirm our commitment to empowering young people and harness their potential to drive progress towards a more resilient and sustainable future. We, as youth, we are very powerful. We can build a world where every voice is heard, every perspective is valued, and every generation works hand in hand to address the defining challenge of our time. Our voice matters, our ideas matters, and we have the power to shape policies and initiatives. Coming to the skills that we all need, it's definitely being aware and make sure that we have the right education to address the challenges that we face. Having the good education, quality education. We may not all of us have access to that. Yes, that's true. But we can make sure that we, through the electronic libraries, through other sources, we can support our own selves. There are sometimes points when no one can lend their hand to us, but we should do it ourselves. So yeah, I mean, the skill that we should all of us have is the courage and wish to learn and never be afraid of asking questions. Thank you.
That's incredible to hear. Yes, we need to pay attention to the politics. We need to pay attention to the information, using the, free, hopefully available resources like electronic libraries to fuel those movements, and not turn away from the negotiating table, which is really where we need to be as people with a stake in the future who will live to see it, as Jake said. Thank you so much for that message. And it's great to hear from someone who's doing this in real time. I'll turn to you next, Grace. It's really hard to stomach that the Global Slavery Index estimates 50 million people live in modern slavery on any given day. And the World Bank predicts that by 2050, 216 million people will be forcibly displaced internally within their own countries solely due to climate change, which will make even more people vulnerable to the risk of human trafficking and modern slavery. So as a human rights activist, why is combating modern slavery such an important issue in the context of these future trends, and what can we do about it?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for making space for the subject of modern slavery on this panel, because I think too many people, definitely our elected leaders, see it as a niche, faraway issue, when the reality is, as you've decided, there are tens of millions of people living in modern slavery in the world today, in every country in the world, and modern slavery, as connected to historical slavery, is deeply embedded in our global economy, to the goods that we buy and use every single day. So maybe I'll start by taking a step back and explaining what modern slavery is. Modern slavery is the systemic removal of a person's freedom, where one person is exploited by another or by a company for personal or financial gain. It's an umbrella term that encompasses a number of highly exploitative practices, including forced labor, forced marriage, human trafficking, debt bondage, and state-imposed forced labor. And to break that 50 million person number down, we're looking at 28 million people in the world living in situations of forced labor and 22 million people living in situations of forced marriage. And I'd like to reiterate that those numbers that I'm counting, they don't include the number of children who are working throughout the world today, which is currently 1 in 10, or the number of children exposed to marriages where they do not consent. So it is absolutely a conservative estimate. In the last 5 years, Walk Free, that produced this world-leading research, in partnership with the United Nations, found confrontingly that there was a 10 million person increase in the number of people living in modern slavery in the world today. And modern slavery, like many of the world's greatest challenges, is deeply interconnected with other systems of oppression and violence. So modern slavery is a very gendered issue. For example, there are more women and girls living in modern slavery today than there are people living in Australia. And equally, modern slavery is very connected to crises. So in the last 5 years, obviously the world has lived through everyone's favorite word, unprecedented crises. But our figures were showing an increase before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And this is because our supply chains in many ways are built for convenience at the cost of almost anything else. Layla, I'm so grateful that we have you at the seat at COP this year, because I think there are far too many people in leadership positions who are viewing conferences like COP and the issues such as the climate crisis as in one silo, when the reality is the climate crisis is a humanitarian crisis. And when you live in a country like Australia we already have a volatile climate, it doesn't need to go that much further until there is massive food insecurity for our entire region. Or as Vanessa Nakate, who is a brilliant climate activist from Uganda, talks about, the direct correlation of climate volatility impacting forced and child marriages in communities across our country. So we really need the climate crisis to be seen as something that is impacting people right now. As you said, Saru, will continue to impact migration pathways, and we need countries to proactively engage in that. We're still seeing resistance on the ratifying of the term climate refugee, and that's because it will impact hundreds of millions of people. So something we say to our government in Australia is, you can either proactively engage now and build some kind of protection, or you will be dealing with huge issues down the track that you'll have no choice to deal with. So you can proactively do something right, or you can reactively deal with something that will be very, very hard to handle. Equally, it's worth noting that the climate crisis is leaning on systems of exploitation, that it has an opportunity to do something different. So many supply chains in the world today, from cotton to cocoa to tobacco to steel to timber, come from historical roots of slavery, are in the same countries where the transatlantic slave trade sat. And we have this opportunity, this closing window, to build a great economy, not based on those historical roots of exploitation. And yet, right now, we are choosing to do that same thing. 60% of the world's polysilica is coming out of Xinjiang in China, where we know the Uyghur population are being exploited under state-imposed forced labor. We know that this urgent call for batteries and the sexy call for Teslas everywhere leads back to batteries and exploitation of forced and child labor in the DRC. And it's just not realistic to say that we can respond to a global pandemic of health crises that is far less than what many other countries face, in a way where the world can respond quickly, can impact supply chains, where we can affect migration pathways. If we can do that for a pandemic around something that much of the world could deal with, we most certainly can do that around pathways in the world today, affecting people in every country in the world. And the last thing I'd say is that this is an issue that is being led and fueled by the world's most powerful economies. The G20 are responsible for 75% of the world's trade, and much of their supply chains are leading into products that we buy and consume every day being made with exploitation. But equally, I think many people would be surprised to hear that over 50% of the world's people living in modern slavery are residing in G20 countries. So in the country you are sitting in right now, please raise this with your elected officials. Please know that your vote matters. Please know that how you spend your money matters. The greatest hoodwinking that has happened to consumers in the modern day is thinking that we shouldn't have basic information about where the goods that we buy and use every day are coming from. And in the simplest way, what I'd say is start with the shirt on your back. If your feminism is not including the women, likely the women of color who are making your clothes, then it is not feminism.
Wow, powerful, and just a masterclass, I think, in advocacy right there. I can really see how you are, giving us so much concrete tools and data, but you're also thinking really strategically about how to link, the climate crisis is an opportunity to rebuild whole systems that affect what might be seen as niche issues like slavery, but really undercut so much of, the goods that we consume every day, the choices we make. Really a call to action for all of us. So thank you for that, Grace. Melody, finally, to round us off, as the the founder of Youthtopia, I know you're no stranger to activism and advocacy as well. You run a platform that's dedicated to helping young people make an impact. And so can you share some examples of how the power of storytelling can break down barriers and build new pathways, especially between generations, that intergenerational connection? And one more question for you. What do you think the UN should do better when engaging young people about the future and working together to save our planet? Over to you.
First of all, what an energy this panel has. I'm so honored and so excited to learn from each and every one of you. I am in Bali, Indonesia right now, so it's the end of a long day for me, but I'm reminded of the power of conversation and the power of learning from each other. And that's why I think the importance of storytelling is actually at the heart of a lot of us young change makers or change makers in general. I think storytelling has the power to grow our creativity. It fosters that ability to imagine a future that we want to work towards. I think, Grace, you painted a really incredible balance of facts, but also storytelling. And I think that narrative brings people through a journey where they can start to understand the interconnectedness of everything, the connecting of dots of so many silos that we go through in everyday life because it's maybe easier to do it that way. But storytelling is an art for us all to be able to connect to an emotion and see the bigger picture. And I think that's where we can understand as well that we won't solve the problems with the same thinking that created it. And I think storytelling allows us to grow in our creativity. It allows us to grow in our imagination for the future we want to work towards. And I think that that's where young people, especially today, have a skill to be able to paint that picture, challenge that narrative of what we've been doing today, and challenge the status quo and say, how can we change what is not working anymore for the greater good? And that's where finding role models, and that's where the connection between the UN and working with young people, role models, if we cannot see what we want to become, then what's the generation we are raising? And I think that that's something where platforms and panels like what we're doing here is already an accelerator for many more young people all around the world to be able to find a role model and a different way of change making. I think that's one thing that I'd like to see more of at these large events, whether it be COP or whether it be another pact that goes out or a resolution that goes out, is celebrating the many different ways to be a change maker. Because that's one of the first things that storytelling breaks down, the narrative of what it means to be part of the movement of change. You don't have to be an incredible public speaker. You don't have to be a founder and start your own project. But how can we celebrate those many differences from each and every one of us, because this movement needs each and every one of us? So I think it's the representation that we want to see more clearly, but also bringing in more role models so that other people can see the different ways of creating change at all levels of society.
Amazing. And a good reminder that, no voice is too small, no story is too small to create ripple effects that impact everyone. And I think we all have found a role model today, as you say. There's so many bits of wisdom among all of us. I want to just round out this discussion and ask you each very quick fire round. One final question that might provide some motivation for everyone in this call. If you could think of the young people in your life that maybe don't know personally, but is there one young person in particular that's motivating you to fight for a better future, that motivates your work? Who would that young person be? And what should world leaders do at the Summit of the Future in September to make that future come true? Maybe we'll start with you, Jake, and then go to Layla, Grace, and Melody.
I think that's a very interesting question. I think it's a young person, it will be a profile of a young person and not necessarily a person, because there's so many people that fit into this profile. But I think it would be that young person who, like you mentioned in my introduction, I do work on diaspora affairs quite significantly. And diaspora affairs is basically trying to connect people of African descent that live or have grown up elsewhere with their African heritage and with their people. And one of the things in my work I have noticed is there's a desperation for young people who have roots in Africa, have heritage from Africa to connect in that way. And policies around that are extremely important. I think a big part of why Africa is somewhat lagging behind in a lot of our developmental issues is really because we are developing on less than the human resource capital available to us, because so many of us find ourselves elsewhere with no inroads into connecting. And so it would be the young person of African descent living, whether it's in Europe or America or in Asia, who wants to connect with their continental counterparts, and how to create that inroad and that channel to be able to allow them to connect with their counterparts, so that they can collectively and collaboratively build a future that works for all of us, right? Bring the skills and the resources and the knowledge that they have from other parts of the world to apply to our local context, and collaborate with people locally who have the local know-how to actually manifest ideas and make great things happen. So I think we are under-resourced on both sides, and if governments bring those two populations together, Africa will go forward much farther very quickly.
Insightful. Thank you. And then over to you, Layla, quickly, then Grace, then Melody.
Thank you. I will be very quick with this. Let's, for all of us, the inspiration, the young inspiration, be the mirror. So the person we see every time in the morning, let it be the inspiration for us. Let us work for the future of our own, and be the inspiration for others as well.
Amazing. Over to you, Grace.
I'm not sure if this answer's loud, but actually my response would be that I think that rampant individualism has got us into a lot of the crises that we're in right now. So I would say it's not for one particular person. Even as an elder sister of many siblings, it's not for one person. It's actually for our communities that we need to work and do this, because regardless of whether or not you have a child, you're a young person yourself, you plan on being a parent one day, there are children on this earth either way. So that question around, should we have children on a planet that is in a lot of trouble, I personally find redundant, because there are already children on this planet who I love deeply and who I do not want to inherit a world that is unfair as the one we live in right now. So I would say that there isn't an individual, and I think we should move away from the individual responses, because I think it is at a very capitalist center of where we're seeing many of the problems today. We need to respond to issues as communities, for communities, by communities.
And I think
Melody, yeah.
I was ready to jump in and add, it's moving from a time of competition to collaboration. And that's something that our generation deeply understands. It's something we live and breathe by. And so that's also in the form of community, but also a characteristic, I would say, of Gen Z and the generation we're a part of. I would also say, I think reverse mentorship should be a DNA of all collaborations. It's not a one-way transaction of where you expect something from young people to be an inspiration only. That time for inspiration only is over. So the reverse mentorship of what we can share from each other, and where we can learn from two completely different generations or two completely different industries coming together. The strength of a successful partnership is where we acknowledge the strengths that we both bring in. So I don't think that the UN has to become the Gen Z champion, and the Gen Z generation doesn't have to become the UN. And that's not what makes a successful partnership. When we become what you cannot be everything to everyone. And I think recognizing your strengths, coming together in a partnership, is what will have a successful collaboration. And that's what we need more of. So I'm excited to see what's coming up from this future summit, and grateful to have been here in today's conversation.
Thank you so much. And we're nearing the end of our session on that note of inspiration. I wanted to make sure that we ask a few questions from the chat. Please keep your answers brief if we can, so we can keep this conversation up and keep it up. We'll keep it up throughout the year, so this won't be the end. You'll be seeing this in the engine room. There's a question from Freya that I'd like to direct towards Jake and Melody, maybe just 1-minute answers each. Can you share approaches and strategies that you believe governments should use to ensure youth advisors they select be truly representative of young people's interests and their diversity? Hard to address in 1 minute, but maybe just give a few examples. Jake, to you.
So I think for starters, the person should be young enough. I say this tongue in cheek, but also very, very representative. There are many countries in which young youth agencies or government agencies that are supposed to be catering to young people have people that are much older who do not necessarily relate to all the issues that young people are. You cannot find one single young person that will relate to all the issues, but if the baseline is youth, there has to at least be that understanding and that representation from a fellow young person, somebody who interacts with younger people, the younger population on a daily basis, right? Even if it's just within their friend group or whatever, there's that. Truly representative is very difficult to achieve. Like complete representation is very difficult to achieve because everyone has a different set of aspects of society that they operate in, and different perspectives and all that. So that person should be young. That's my first thing. And the person should be open to conversation and willing to, like Melati said, collaborate. Collaboration is the most important thing. To bring as many voices into the room that cannot all physically be present is important, to be able to draw on experiences that are not yours. So I would give an example. I did not go to university in Ghana. A bunch of Ghanaian young people are in university here. So it's my job to connect with university students here in Ghana. How do I do that? Through the various student-led organizations. I have meetings with these representatives and take on their concerns, visit their institutions, understand what they're dealing with, and then package that in a way that either creates an opportunity for them to come and represent themselves in front of the president in a boardroom meeting, or that I take these concerns and I take it to meetings that I go to. But fundamentally, the person needs to be young, energetic, and willing to collaborate.
Easy. Great. Melati,
And
over to you.
simply add on to that, I think it's also, taking it to another level of age is also, it's not enough. There's another layer on top of it. What's the track record of this young person? Because we have an incredible, vast number of young people who have a track record where they've proven themselves, where they've shared real life examples of how they are leading change in their communities. And I think giving them the platform to showcase what they've already been able to achieve and how they can apply that to the community. And that's, of course, what Jake was saying, be an active listener, and how can you showcase that back into implementing that into the role you would be getting.
Thank you so much, both of you. We're going to quickly go to a question from Kopotso for you, Layla and Grace. Again, just 1 minute responses if you can. How do you position yourself in these decision-making spaces? And how did you approach finding mentorship in the early stages of your journey? Really important. Over to you, Layla, first.
Thank you, Saru. So basically, it was me trying to make sure that my voice is heard at the basic level, starting from school and university. So yeah, I was one of those activists at the during university, some student clubs and etc., and specifically related to sustainable development and climate. It was a kind of a passion. Basically, yes, that's what drives in, and that's what makes your voice made heard.
Wonderful. Grace?
I think that, could you just tell me the first part of the question again?
Yeah, absolutely. How do you position yourself in decision-making spaces? And then how did you approach finding mentorship early on?
Look, I think it's like, we need to be really honest. It's not easy for young people to get into decision-making spaces. That's why platforms like this are so important, because they break open space. There isn't natural space. What Jake is talking about is really unique and amazing, and every country should have it, but it's unique. It's not common. In Australia, it's certainly not common, let alone across our region. Young people are still in many cultural settings seen and not heard, overly optimistic, talking about issues that they don't understand. And we all know that that isn't true. So I think what I would say is by starting by asking as many questions as you can, because it's not normal for people to not be able to answer basic questions around basic human rights and the climate. It's not normal for questions to be answered within the term of an election of 3 years. That's not normal. And we don't need to abide by those rules that we're inheriting. We're allowed to ask questions of everyone. I think the quickest way any young person gives up their power is by not knowing how much of it they have. And even though this sounds blunt, Australians are blunt, so you can take it. Just remember that your elected leaders literally work for you. It's their job to answer your questions. It's their job to answer to you. And this platform is brilliant because it's showing, as this power shift happens, leaders are listening because they have to. Leaders are listening because they're nervous about losing your vote. So make sure you put your vote behind leaders that actually align with what you care about, that can answer your questions. And if they can't, make some noise because it scares them. And that vote then goes for how you spend your money. Ask your companies where your clothes are being made. Ask companies about whether or not coffee is fair trade, whether or not cocoa is fair trade. Because if they can't answer those questions, they don't deserve your vote and they don't deserve your hard-earned money.
So critical. Half of the world is going to elections, so I feel ready to question, to call out and call out what isn't normal. I think we all, again, found role models in this conversation that we so vitally need, as Melody said. We hopefully took down at least one piece of wisdom that we're going to use to fuel change. This call to move from competition to collaboration from Grace and Melody, simple solutions to use to include youth in decision making from Jake. Really practical call from Layla to stay engaged in the nitty-gritty of negotiating and politics. And with that inspiration, I'm going to pass us over to Taylor to take us into the next session. Thank you so much to all of the speakers, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Wow, thank you so much to those incredible speakers. And I know, Saru, you mentioned, I'm sure we can all leave with one bit of wisdom, one takeaway. I had my notepad in front of me and I think I had 20 from that conversation. So here's hoping we can even just apply some of what we took away from that conversation. But it is now my absolute pleasure to introduce our next speakers. We have Rogelio and Yannick, both of whom are leading experts working at the forefront of the Summit of the Future process. Rogelio recently took on the role of Senior Policy Officer at the Permanent Mission of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and Yannick assumed duties as the Counselor for Social, Cultural and Humanitarian Affairs at the Permanent Mission of Jamaica in August 2021. Now, having both Rogelio and Yannick here with us today is particularly significant for those not quite in the know yet, as the Netherlands and Jamaica are the co-facilitators of the intergovernmental process for the Declaration on Future Generations, which, as Harshani mentioned earlier, will be an annex to the Pact for the Future. So we are incredibly lucky to be able to ask these incredible leaders a few questions about the process and their ambitions for the Summit of the Future. But don't forget, yes, I have a few questions I'm asking first, but do keep your questions coming in the chat because our team will be working away to gather those for you. But Yannick, Rogelio, thank you so much for joining us and generously giving us your time when you are incredibly busy over these next few months. But Yannick, I would love to start with you as a designated expert for the co-facilitation of the Declaration on Future Generations. You have been tirelessly supporting your ambassadors through the process. I'd love to know, what does success look like for you, both at the summit and in the years to come?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question, Taylor, and good morning, everyone, or for wherever, greetings to you, wherever you're joining from. Firstly, let me just say that it is an incredible honor to be among the panelists that you've brought together today. I have just, quite like you, I had my notepad here, just taking down quick notes. And I'm just like, oh my God, yes, I think we're all on the same page. This is so inspiring. And so I'm very happy to be a part of this dialogue and to come back and to see that we come back after what we recognize the Easter holiday, to come back and to see that I think the path to the Summit of the Future looks very promising. I can honestly say, from where I sit, yes, having supported my ambassador in his role as co-facilitator for the past year or so, since last February, it has really been a very insightful experience. And I think that the majority of the times, we have these conversations regularly as we work together with the Netherlands to sort of develop the framework for this process. We have these conversations all the time where it comes to whenever we engage youth, we find that the thinking and the proposals are so clear, they're so concrete, they're so ambitious that it has to be prioritized, their views have to be prioritized. And so just hearing what and building on what the previous panel would have come up with in terms of their responses on the various elements. Success, yes, we intend to have an outcome, we intend to have the Pact for the Future, we intend to have these annexes. But as a young person sharing very many of these views on what the UN framework looks like, on what decisions are being made and what decisions aren't being taken into account, I think true success for me in this sort of process where we're meant to be achieving consensus, because that is the biggest show of unity that we have here. True success would be a reflection, a document that truly reflects genuine acknowledgement of social and economic inequities, genuine effort to compromise, to meet each other halfway, and a genuine ownership of the commitments that are being made. I don't know for those of you who are just joining, I see a lot of you are just joining for the first time. When it comes to negotiation processes in the UN, very often at the end of the day, even last year, if you're following, we have issues of reaching consensus, breaking silence, because there are many member states, especially from the global south, that are frustrated, because the negotiations in a lot of the cases, they tend to be or they feel disenfranchised, they feel like their views aren't being taken into account, that their reality isn't properly reflected in a document that is meant to be guiding everybody's future, everybody's way forward, everybody's outlook. And so genuine success for me at the summit would be any outcome that we can all equally own, knowing full well that we would have had to give up something to get somewhere, but recognizing that this is my reality. There was an effort here made to take it into account and to allow me to develop in a way that is best suited to my nation, to my constituents, to my people. And for us to be able to collectively move forward and not have to wait for another opportunity, to not have to wait for 2030 to then say, maybe we'll give it another shot. Maybe then our voice will be heard. The long term, in terms of implementation, sorry, after the summit, and thank God for you guys, because you guys are thinking well beyond. Whereas I can be honest with you, as member states, we're looking to the summit and we're looking to, yes, what the institution can do and what the framework will look like, but we're not yet there. There's so many things going on, and so we rely on you as the grassroots implementers, really, to help us carry our way forward. And I think just going back on what we're saying about acceptance of the diversity of our own realities, and knowing that, as I think it was Jake that might have mentioned, that everyone can start somewhere. Our governments can implement these things today. We can look at the previous panel of Grace saying, we can look at some of the things that are manifesting today that are from some historical elements that have not yet been addressed. It's a choice to move forward. It's a choice to move forward in the same way or to do it very differently. And so I think true success in the implementation or in going forward beyond the summit really looks at practical ways in which we can move forward together, recognizing that we all may not get there at the same time, but we will get there.
I think so much of what you just said speaks exactly to the heart of the engine room, which is, number one, it's that choice to move forward. It's a choice to try and be part of the future and the solutions, and not necessarily get bogged down in the challenges that can come with trying to build consensus and tackle head on the challenges we face. I think also your point about the affirming nature of community and unity, as well as the power of young people, really validates, I think, all the young people putting their time into this grassroots work. So thank you so much for that. Rogelio, I'd love to invite you to come in now, with the summit being, for those of us who have been listening in over the last few years, such a prominent topic at the UN over the last 2 years. I hope it's okay and worth me asking the question, why should people outside the UN care, especially as Hashani mentioned before, 64 countries heading into elections this year, representing more than half of the global population, and some young people are questioning the significance of their votes on the global stage. Why should they care about the summit of the future?
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you also to the organizers, the hosts, the panelists, and as well as the participants that are here today. I think from personal experience, I recently started at the mission, but I'm actually from St. Martin and Curacao. They're Dutch islands in the Caribbean, so I feel like I have this, let's say, global south and global north aspect to me, and I think that really helps in the discussions. As co-facilitators on expert level, to see the different sides of everybody's opinion. So what Yannick was saying about building consensus, it is very important, and I do think that we have to be able to see each other's where we're coming from. And I think outside this government system, this UN system, this multilateral system, people often are like, when I speak to people, what is the summit of the future? Like, what are you actually doing, right? So I think, it's very important to have discussions like this today to create awareness for it, but also to make it more tangible. We might be talking about negotiations and a document, but what is a document, right? It has to actually lead to something. I think many people are, and youth as well, are disenfranchised with, government and democracy. And if you look at all the different challenges we're facing when it comes to climate, when it comes to, what Yannick mentioned, socioeconomic equalities, but also, conflicts, seeing the recent developments in Israel, Palestine, youth feel disenfranchised, but not just youth, also actually adults. So, that intergenerational dialogue that we discuss, it's really important to show that you do have a voice. So having these discussions, the stakeholder consultations that we did as co-facilitators with the youth, with indigenous groups, these are very important moments to show your voice. And that also counts for your vote. Whether you feel disenfranchised or not, you have to make use of your democratic right to vote. And vote according to your morale and to your heart. It's not always perfect. The Summit of the Future isn't ideal, but it has to also lead to actual change. So we need to keep these conversations going also after the Summit of the Future, because our role is limited, but following up after September is when we have the possibility to have the discussions on implementation, right? Very practical. And that's where youth is also really important. And we, of course, focus on the Declaration for Future Generations. So we kind of, that looks further than just youth, that looks at all generations to come. And the declaration is actually posted online. So for those interested, please look at the Zero Draft. And these are the discussions that we will want to keep going forward with. So I'll leave it at this for now.
Wonderful. And I have to say, I think both of you in this conversation are really role modeling so much of what you've referenced there, which is the need to open up these conversations to young people. I know myself, our team, lots of the young people on these calls were in a lot of those consultations. So you've definitely made the process more open and accessible. I'm going to try and squeeze a few more questions out of the time that we have. So continuing that rapid fire pace is much appreciated. So international cooperation has been highlighted as crucial in the lead up to the Summit of the Future. How do you see providing this open, inclusive environment that truly values young people coming to life? And why is investing in the future of these young people so pivotal at this specific point in history? I'd love to pose that question to you both. Yannick, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yes, there has been great effort towards intergenerational cooperation, and really and truly, the fact of the matter is, when you've been in a certain situation or a certain role as decision makers for so long, you become almost disillusioned. The aspirations are you can only go so much. It eventually plateaus. The energy eventually wanes, and things end up in an endless loop. And so the energy, especially right now, the subset of young people that we have right now is incredibly motivated, incredibly innovative, collaborative as well. I think is it Malati that was talking about, connecting the dots and moving beyond competition to collaboration. I mean, this is what we actually need, not generations or young people among themselves combating for visibility, but the actual drive to make something happen for the greater good. And so I think having conversations like these, I've seen the sort of framework for this model carrying the engine room forward, carrying the roadmap forward, the roadmap to 2100. I see initiatives like these are really good models to creating that space, and not only to have high-level engagement, because by the time you get to the high-level engagement, decisions have already been pieced together along the way. So young people need to be having these conversations in your communities, and in the community, like our previous speaker would have said, one of the previous speakers would have said, within the communities, you don't recognize the power you have. But if you are making the change, they have to listen to you. They simply have to. They have to listen to who is moving and doing what they cannot do. They, the decision makers of today, cannot do themselves. They need the help of the young people. And so you start there, start where you are with what you have, and then you move, on your way up accordingly, because by the time you get to the high level discussions, where things move a little slower than we like in processes and institutions, structures, people don't like to change as much. By the time you get there, it's a shut door in your face, So I encourage, so while we're here fighting the good fight to ensure that youth are heard at this particular level, I mean, being a young person in the service myself and Rogelia are young person in the service, having joined in our 20s, where we have very few of the unique opportunities to be inside foreign service offices, by the just adding your thoughts, etc. Literally seeing your dreams and your visions come to life in black and white. Not everybody has that opportunity, but it doesn't have to be there only.
And Rogelia, I hope you don't mind me jumping in. I'd love to actually give you an additional question that we've had come in from our wonderful audience. From Susmita from Nepal has a question about the necessity to come back to that Global South leadership element of the conversation when reimagining the UN for the future. And she shares that Nepal is a very small country that is affected by huge actions from many bigger countries, mainly the impact of climate change and melting of snow on the Himalayas. How can we make change, and how can she use her voice when she's from such a small country?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, because of course the UN system is in theory an ideal system because it's one country, one vote. But of course, influence of bigger countries will always be a discussion. I think currently it's a disenfranchised system, and I think we're also looking at a world that's very polarized. How do you, and then future generations, I think is a key term as well. How do you ensure that you protect the rights of all, right? So it's ensuring that Nepal's snow caps don't melt away. That's not just an importance for Nepal, that's an importance for the world. And that's where, when we talk about intergenerational equity and intergenerational justice, these are terms that we try to bring forward in the Declaration for Future Generations, because it's about shared responsibility. With the pandemic as well, there was this whole race for vaccines, but what was the point in that, right? It's a shared responsibility to ensure the safety and protection for all moving forward. And I think that's a role where a young person from Nepal can use their voice to indicate, this is not just important for me in my country, this is important for the region, but also for the world. And I think that's kind of where we need to meet each other halfway, what Yannick said all the way in the beginning. This shared belief for a better future for all. I think one thing that I did want to build on the previous question was, investing in the future of youth. It's we also talk in the declaration about this multiplier effect. I think investing in education has a positive effect. We talk about, for example, generational wealth. How that is passed down from family, from generation to generation within the family. Knowledge and education does the same thing, right? If you can educate this generation, that passes forward as well. So I think that's something we need to definitely keep focusing on.
And I will commend you. That was not an easy question to answer, and you did a fantastic job. So thank you so much for doing that. Yannick, we're going to sneak in one last question for you before we have to round out our time together. Druvak, Maureen, and Sem have all submitted similar questions, and we've tried to bring them all together to pose to you. So as someone involved in the facilitation of the negotiations towards the summit, how can we follow the negotiation and the positions of various member states and stakeholders more closely, and perhaps even participate more directly to institutionalize this open process? What more do you think that the formal UN processes need to do to ensure that young voices are heard beyond perhaps just the consultations? Once again, not an easy question, but hopefully an impactful one that we can end on.
Sure, absolutely, no problem. No, fully recognizing the need to ensure that we remain engaged. As Roheli would have mentioned, we started with the stakeholder consultation, which is not the usual process. Normally, it's member states and then external stakeholders. But we recognize the value of the knowledge and expertise that lies within youth and other groupings, stakeholder groupings, and how that feeds into member states' processes and allows them to think, provoking their thought around what use of data and foresight actually means and how it's impactful in their own unique context, domestic context. In terms of engaging at this particular juncture, we are recommending that youth participants, especially since there are such broad networks, you're connected with UN Foundation, you're connected with GGIN, the Coalition for the UN You Need. I know that there are several youth advocates that are part of these networks that have key focal points that are able to better guide in terms of how you access the discussions, the negotiations from that angle. We are supporting the co-facilitators in sort of arranging additional dialogue exchanges with youth throughout the process, recognizing at this particular stage that it is intergovernmental negotiations, which are necessarily as open as stakeholders would like them to be. There is physical access. So long as you can get into the UN premises, there is physical access to the discussions. But we recognize the need to ensure that everyone is on the same page because there are parallel discussions on this, and these things will feed into your own work, your own planning for the future, leading up to the summit and beyond. And we need that level of support for the process. And so there is thinking around how best we can have, probably virtual, since we can reach more persons that way, how we can have interim dialogue with stakeholders that would allow for sort of exchange on the particular issues that might be raised, the particular sticking points, or anything that those who are already connected with various networks that could have an opportunity to share that they think could actually help the process advance further. Our process only lasts for this quarter. We end in June. We end in June. And so the thinking is that we will be engaging at least, we'll have another round of consultations, at least maybe perhaps 2 more. Sometime in between all of the processes and definitely at the end. And of course, our co-facilitators will be engaged. They are constantly engaging those who invite them to events to ensure that they give up like a personal insight. They are very open to that as well, but fully respecting the fact that member states do need the space to negotiate.
Well, I have to say, and I'm saddened to say that we're reaching the end of our time with the 2 of you, but I take great comfort in the fact that we have leaders like you who are really at the forefront of these processes, who we can tell really resonate with the spirit of the engine room and everything these young people are advocating for with improving our shared future. And I hope that everyone on the call will join me in showing our gratitude for both Yannick and Rogelio in sharing your insights, coming off the back of what I'm sure is busy week on busy month of stakeholder management to then face up to yet another group of people with lots of questions for you, and none of them were easy. So thank you so much to both of you. We are incredibly grateful. And we now are approaching the halfway point of our time together, and it is my absolute pleasure to hand over to our lead Next Generation Fellow, Inez Yabar, as we bid farewell to Rogelia and Yannick, who will introduce our next dynamic session. Over to you, Inez.
Thank you so much, Taylor. It's really exciting to be here and see so many people joining us from around the world. We are over half the world population. We are under 30, most of us on this call, and we're primarily also located in young countries across Asia and Africa. So we know that the need to transform how the UN thinks with young people has never been more urgent. And I'm so glad to have this conversation with our ASG, Felipe Polier, and also Prachi Shivgaonkar from India, which I'll introduce in just a minute, because we know that traditional platforms often provide limited access. And when they do, it's often too late to make real impact. So we here, I know those of us on the call are ready to take that impact forward. There are so many challenges we face around the world, and we really have an opportunity with the Summit of the Future coming up in September to turn our aspirations into action. Building on commitments that were made at the 2022 Transforming Education Summit, and the 2023 SDG Summit, well, we laid the groundwork for this World Social Summit that's coming in 2025. So the global gathering that's happening in September may seem far away, but we're already talking about it today because we believe it's a true stepping stone to building our future. And I'm really excited to have this conversation as a moment where we can reflect, looking back, but also looking forward. So without further ado, let's have this conversation. Today, we have the inaugural ASG for Youth Affairs of the United Nations. We also have Prachi Shagaonkar, who's the lead Next Generation India Fellow, and myself, UN Foundation lead Next Generation Global Fellow. And I would love to start with asking a question I've been dying to ask you, Felipe. When I was in school, I applied for a scholarship saying that I wanted to work at the UN. And I can now say kind of my dream has come true because I try and help young people access the decision-making spaces, including the UN. So I would love to know, what did you dream when you were younger? And now, in the role that you have, how has it come true, allowing you to bring young people's voices to not only inform, but also shape actionable outcomes of the summit of the future?
So thank you, Ines, Prachi, and Taylor. For me, it's a pleasure to be here and to join everyone that is joining online. So it's good morning, good afternoon, good night. I'm sure it will depend where you are from and where you are watching us. So thank you for this question, which is, of course, personal, but I think that somehow it reflects that every of us have some background, some history, and there are a lot of things that that happen that bring us where we are now. No? And in my case, my background is a bit different than maybe for someone that is working in the UN. No, I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a public affairs officer. So I'm a medical doctor. I'm a pediatrician, actually. But when I was starting to study medicine, there was something that somehow changed a little bit how I see things. Because when I started, I studied medicine in the public university in my home country. I'm from the Latin America region, a very small country called Uruguay. And when I get into the university, I got involved into a students' movement. And being part of that students' movement and bringing into the conversation and to the decision-making processes of the university things, and seeing how things can shape and can change when young people are involved, it somehow put that in my DNA, no? And that's maybe not possible in a biological conversation, but in somehow I feel it's part of me now, no? So for a long while, I was doing both. I was involved in politics at the local level and then at the regional level, and in somehow always pushing and believing in the importance of bringing young people into the conversation. Because I've experienced it myself. When you're involved, things can change. So I'm here now, and I'm very excited where I am. So I have the responsibility of leading the newly established United Nations Youth Office, which is a specific team and a specific office that has a task to advance on youth affairs within the United Nations across all the United Nations pillars, no? So peace and security, human rights, sustainable development. And this is something huge. So I think it's my turn now. and I do like this is a dialogue. So my turn is to get into the conversation, Prachi. So I would like to hear, Prachi, from your experience as an innovator yourself. So what innovative approaches would you like to see the United Nations to adopt that more young people are able to participate and engage in shaping its agenda and policies?
Absolutely. I think the first innovative approach, I believe, is for more and more young people to know about you, Felipe, because we don't know that people like you exist who can be a central part of how the UN functions. And I say that because my journey also began in a silo. It began in a small corner of India as a young girl, asking myself, what can I do to fight climate change? At that time, UN to me did not seem accessible. It seemed like only world leaders and scientists and people who hold high positions can become part of the United Nations dialogue and agenda. So instead of starting from top, I started from my home. I wondered, I took a challenge to reduce my personal carbon footprint by 10% that year to fight climate change. And as I started doing that, something very interesting happened, which is that a lot of people around me came and said, we want to be a part of this. What I realized is that everybody wants to be a part of making change. They just don't know how. And so we built a mobile app called Cool the Globe, which would mobilize ordinary citizens to start taking climate action in their day-to-day lives. And if there's one thing I've learned from this journey is that, I've got a chance to interact with thousands of young people. And all of them have a zeal and a yearning to make a difference. I think to capitalize on that zeal is one of the most powerful things the UN can do. So I think when young people hold the bandwagon of getting in more young people, it becomes like a party, which is what we need to do at the UN. So I'm so glad that we're having this discussion, and I'm so glad, Felipe, that you are leading the vision to make young people a part of the UN agenda. And which is why actually I want to ask you, in the young people I meet today, I see that they have so many solutions, innovations, ideas on how we could solve the global challenges in front of us today. They wonder how can their priorities be heard and be a part of the UN agenda. So how can they go about that, and how can they ensure that their governments, their community, the thought leadership is engaged so that their priorities can be heard at the UN level?
Thank you, Prachya, and thank you for sharing your personal experience and background. And this is a dialogue, and this is also a listening platform in somehow for all of us, for the ones, and mostly I think for the ones that we are here being part of this conversation. So I will start like saying something that is obvious, but I think it's very important when you have the chance to be in some specific positions, no, that brings a lot of responsibility. But it's very clear to understand what's your role, no? So my role as head of the United Nations Youth Office is not about being the voice of young people in the UN, no? That's too big to be the role of one person. Of course, my personal experience and being in somehow young in some spaces I have the chance to be brings this with a different perspective. But my role and our roles as an office is to push the system so there are more spaces where young people can engage with this organization. And that is something that is not only about the global issues, it's about the regional and the local platforms, because that's where things really happen, no? So maybe my first example in how I can see young people can engage with the UN is raising your voices where you are.
For me, we just had a call with some fellows a couple of days ago where we were asked to share some of like the good stories that we believe that the UN has helped deliver. And I think all of those include young people. Like we were talking about the Paris Agreement. And that was something like climate activists all around the world have rallied and really moved countries forward to trying to think about what climate means for us and how we can protect our planet. There was Bhuti, who was talking, our fellow from the UAE, who was talking about the SDGs. The creation of the SDGs, again, there was a huge mobilization of young people around like, how can we create goals for humanity that unite us and that give us that hope that we can reach a world where there is less poverty or even no poverty, where there's gender equality, where we have good partnerships to achieve a better future. Daharia was talking about the first global agreement on ethics of AI. And I think AI is something that young people have really worked on and talked about a lot, because it will impact our lives much more in the future. And there was also a lot of talk by fellows like Saru and Drubak on humanitarian aid and how the UN has really brought that to the forefront in different countries. And that goes to the answer to your second question about the impact on young people's lives. I read the book by Ban Ki-moon called Resolved, Uniting Nations in a Divided World. And he speaks about, like, when he was a child, how the UN helped him live and helped his family get out of a situation of war. And then he became the Secretary General. So like seeing that journey of him as a young person and how the UN impacted his life, and then he impacted so many more becoming the Secretary General, I think goes back to the topic of hope. So the UN has impacted young people's lives, and as young people, we're also impacting it. The fact that we're here today, I think, demonstrates that. And I think it would be great also to talk about other young people, and I know you've been having different conversations with them, so maybe I think we're nearing the end of our conversation. I think we could continue to talk about this much longer, but I would love to welcome Taylor back, as I believe you have one final question for us.
Yes, I think I can attest that everyone will be feeling the same, that I'm very sad to say that this session is coming to an end. And I have one final question that I would love to pose to each of you, while also thanking you for being so generous and open with your answers so far. And so that final question is, whose future are you fighting for specifically? And how does this shape the work that you will be embarking on over the years to come? Felipe, I'd love to pass to you first.
Okay, so thank you. And this is like a big one. So, of course, when it's about our office and it's about our challenges, we have the responsibility of thinking globally, no? and big. So we are clear that we are pushing for a system that better reflects and has platforms for young people to be meaningfully engaged, which is a complex concept, because it's not only about space, it's about accountability, it's about safety, it's about really being in the decision of the making. So we need to consider a lot of things when we are talking about this. We need to consider those that sometimes are leaving behind. We need to consider specifically the gender gaps. We need to consider that this should be safe spaces for people, no matter the language they speak or the religion they have. No, and that's maybe the central on what we are working and the direction in where we try to move.
Wow, amazing. I agree with so much of what you said, Felipe. And it reminded me of even your question, Taylor. It reminded me of when I was 18. I spent about 4 months visiting every slum in my city. And I was doing something very simple. I was documenting the dreams of children. You know, I was going to kids across the slums. I was asking them something very simple. What is your dream? And what do you want to be when you grow up? That experience never left me, because during the day I would visit these young, enthusiastic, bright children. I would have conversations with them. Someone would want to become a conductor. Somebody would dream of becoming a teacher. Someone would dream of becoming an engineer. Some of them dreamt of becoming comedians and artists. I would listen to their dreams. I would listen to their vision of the future. And then in the evening, I would come back to the foundation's office that I was working on, and I would face the grim statistics that most of these dreams were not going to have a fair chance at being met, because most of these children were going to drop out even before they could get to higher education. But the fact that they had dreams meant something. And that's what continues to drive me even today. Then the future I see for my country and for the world is where young people can dream big and have a fair chance at having their dreams met, where young people are ambitious, not just for themselves, but for their countries and for the world. A world where young people believe not in somebody else, but in their own ability to bring about change. And a world where each one of us is a change maker, where young people are not just spectators, but play an active role in shaping the world. That is the future I imagine, and that is the future all of us are working for, Ines, you, me, and Felipe. And that's what drives me.
Yeah, it's so great to see how we're all fighting for maybe someone's or multiple people's future. And when you said that question, Taylor, I was like, who? There are so many people. And I first thought, you mentioned slum Prachi in Peru. When I was 15, I went and helped build a house in a shanty town. And there was this little girl called Mariluz. And she already spoke 3 languages, like our local language and Spanish, and was already starting to try and speak English with some foreigners who were there. And I was like, what future is she going to be living in this? We were making a prefabricated house. It was 8 meters wide, 3 meters long. It was really, really tiny. And so just thinking about her future and how can we make her future better? That's SDG 1, right? Reducing poverty. That's SDG 10, reducing inequalities. That will impact her life if we achieve it. Then last year, I was living in Sierra Leone, and actually, I unfortunately got a message today from a friend saying his niece's mom just passed away. So she passed away from malaria. Again, this is talking about health. So how can we make sure that the impact on this little girl's life of now not having a mother, because the context of her society means that this is still a threat. And now her uncle having to take care of her. And when we think about the future of the world, we're thinking about Africa becoming half of the global youth population by 2100. So this isn't just a future possibility, it's really a call to action to us as we're fighting for the future, that we're fighting for people's lives, and especially those in countries that are most vulnerable. And right now, I'm currently staying with a friend who has a 1.5-year-old called Olivia from Mexico, but she's living in France. She has the possibility for education. She has the possibility to have good healthcare and so on. But if she were in Mexico, maybe the situation would be harder. Her mom was just sharing with me that she would be scared that she could be kidnapped, for instance. And so all the futures that we're fighting for, what you shared, Felipe, what you shared, Prachi, and what everyone probably on the call is thinking of someone right now, that's what we are fighting for today. And that hope that you shared, Prachi, and that you picked on Felipe, I think is what we all have and what is driving us. And I know we still have stuff on the agenda, so I'll pass back to Taylor because I know there's stuff to come and more inspiration as well.
Oh, wow. Look, I have to say that this is truly everything that was just discussed is truly what the Engine Room is all about, building a movement of young changemakers who are driven by the fight for our collective future and the ambition to build a more inclusive and resilient world for all generations. It shows that whether you're just starting out your change-making journey or you hold one of the most prominent youth enablement roles that we have in the world, that you are an important part to play in this fight for people and planet as we approach the summit of the future. So my sincerest gratitude to Ines, to Prachi, to Felipe. It's been incredible to listen to everything that you've had to share. It's been insightful and inspiring, and I hope that we can now carry this sense of purpose and ambition that you have gifted us with into our next segment, where we're going to dive into the vision and strategy of the 2024 Engine Room for the future. So please join me in sharing a final thank you with our wonderful guests via the chat as we prepare to show you how you can get involved and be part of bringing the 2100 roadmap to life. My goodness, so I constantly feel like I am pulling us away from incredible conversations, but thank you all for continuing to scoot along this journey with me as we step from one chapter of this conversation to the next. And as I mentioned, it is now my pleasure, alongside my wonderful colleague Nandia, to walk you through some of what we have in store for you and take you from this big picture to zoom into today and this very moment and the launch of the 2024 Engine Room for the future. So at this point, I hope you're starting to get the idea of why we're all here. But for those still wondering what is the Engine Room and how can I make an impact here, we are going to answer all of those questions now. But we're going to start at the beginning, and that is that the Engine Room was first launched in 2023 to address the growing appetite, demand, and undeniable momentum that we were seeing from young changemakers around the world who were ready to be taken seriously as powerful change agents for the future. In its first 9 months, the Engine Room engaged more than 44,000 people, nurtured 6,000 innovators, shared 250 opportunities to catalyze impact, engaged 37 world-leading experts, and I have to say, not to toot our own horn, but 97% of the young people that we worked with highly recommended this as an investment of their time and that it was worthwhile engaging in the Engine Room as a way to make their impact. So that sort of sings its own story for me, and I hope that it gives you a compelling reason to get ready to invest your time this year to be part of that youth movement that Rogelio said earlier is so important, that the ASG, Prachi, and Inez really reinforced to us in that last conversation. So this year, we're looking to work together to develop the foundations for the 2100 agenda. This means drawing together the collective wisdom that we all have within this group, insights from the youth movement at the heart of the Engine Room for the future, and funnel this into impactful and influential advocacy towards the summit of the future. We will engage in high-level digital events such as this one, where we will see world-leading experts share their insights. We will have deep dive policy spotlight dialogues where we can get into the nitty-gritty and really ask those second, third order questions. And we will mobilize through our 5 action groups that Nandir will tell you more about momentarily, and capitalize on opportunities for global activations. So how does this all come together, you might be wondering? Well, let me tell you, along our journey to the summit, each of these elements will come together to guide your path, ensuring that the Engine Room is enriched with inspiration and insight to help us craft that 2100 learning agenda, driven by our action groups, but informed by every single one of you. This journey will be bold, creative, unexpected, and hopefully produce something truly impactful, driving a reimagination of our shared future. This process will follow a human-centered design approach intended to unlock the creative genius and collective wisdom of this group. We will empathize, we will define the challenges we see, we will ideate creative solutions that hopefully no one even sees coming, we will prototype ideas, and then validate these ideas with real leaders who are at the forefront of advocacy, sustainable development, and the international system. But to take us one step further and tell us a bit more about the Engine Room's action groups, it is my pleasure to pass to my wonderful colleague Nandir Noel.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for that kind introduction. Hi, everyone. It is such a pleasure to join you on this call. I am really excited by seeing all your responses in the chat and even sharing your LinkedIn profiles. I really hope that we take advantage of that and connect with one another and connect with us at the UNF team. As Taylor mentioned, my name is Nandir Noel. I recently joined the UNF team as the Next Generation Global Fellows Manager. And like many of you, I am also a newcomer to this process. And so I'm balancing feelings of emotions of excitement, confusion, but just an eagerness to dive in. And so as I take us forward, I just wanted to share more about the action groups and their involvement in the Engine Room process. I would like to add that personally, I love that the action groups are really broad in their theme. So you'll see here, people, planet, peace, prosperity, partnerships, and these follow the 5 Ps of sustainable development. And we have crafted these action groups to be working to create truly bold and innovative ideas for the learning agenda on the road to 2100. So it's fascinating, at least for me, to see such a diverse mix of interest areas, but one specific goal, which is to build a future that works for everyone, like some of our panelists mentioned earlier. The action groups have a really clear purpose, and they are focused on bringing together intergenerational dialogue, knowledge exchanges with leading experts and young changemakers, and cultivating innovative solutions for the benefit of all generations. I am thrilled to give a brief overview of our action group members. And it's funny, in giving this overview of the action group, it's such a hard job because I'm finding it incredibly stressful to condense all the talent of our action group members into 30 seconds, but I will do my best. And it is humbling, but these are our action group members, and they have the fantastic job of driving these efforts for making a future that is sustainable, just, and fair. The action group is comprised of, actually represents a diverse mix of 51 young people who are not only intelligent, but they are creative, they're talented, and incredibly empathetic. They work across several different spheres, and they are global in scope. So you will notice that 86% of our action group members represent young countries in the global south. These are countries, like you would have picked up in the presentation so far, these are countries where more than 50% of the population are under 30. And these countries hold the greatest stake in our future. These action groups do not work alone. They need you, they need experts, they need change makers. These groups will foster several opportunities across the year to amplify the insights, the questions, your passions of all members of the engine room. This will be through pit stops, spotlight sessions, like Taylor mentioned, and the engine room youth survey, which we posted earlier and will post again. And there will be many more opportunities to engage throughout the year. I look forward to all our engagement as we launch this process. As I see in the chat and in all your questions, I'm just excited to go forward with this group. And I know that all your insights, all your passions will be reflected in the engine room process. So let me pass on to the dynamic Nandini Harihar, who is our Ocean Fellows for Next Generation India, who will lead the next session that is a rich and intimate discussion with leaders who are taking proactive action to craft our shared future and who have a clear vision for 2100. Over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Andir. Hello to everyone joining across different time zones. Hopefully that should only be the thing that divides us in the future. It's an absolute pleasure of mine to moderate this next powerhouse panel on the future is ours to create. And paraphrasing Prachi from a previous session, we need to hear and learn about the stories of young people and intergenerational efforts to learn, to motivate, and to commit for a better future, since the youth of today are the ancestors of tomorrow. So before we move into the discussion, I'll quickly introduce our panelists. We have Memory Bhanda. She's a child rights activist and an advocate for girls' education and a fierce global campaigner against child marriage, who has been advocating for social justice since she was 13. As a founder and president of the Foundation for Girls Leadership Malawi, Memory spent the last 10 years mentoring and inspiring young girls and women in Malawi through her work, mobilizing them to stand up and fight for girls' rights and gender equality. Our next panelist is Neil Dang, a South Sudanese refugee, storyteller, youth advocate, and community organizer. He spent 11 years in the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, and now attends Huron University in Canada. He has a long history of leading change, including launching the Refugee Youth Peace Ambassador, and she leads Kakuma initiatives. Neil is also leading Canada's Refugee Education Council, a youth advisory board on refugee education for Canada's Minister of International Development. And our final panelist is Frank Moher. He's the director of the National Society Development Services of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, IFRC. The IFRC is a network of 191 national societies with over 16 million volunteers in 18,000 local sections, with more than half of the volunteers, which I would say about maybe 8 million, are young people. Amongst many tasks, France is also responsible for youth and volunteering, and under his leadership, he has developed and globally scaled up innovative youth engagement programs. So what we're going to be discussing in this section is to dwell on the proactive steps, initiatives, and actions taken by our speakers to create and shape a more inclusive future. We'll be discussing the rising prominence and future of young countries, which is where 50% of the populace is under 30, and the imperative to champion marginalized voices and identify urgent actions needed for today to lay the foundations for a better and a clearer vision into 2100. So I feel incredibly lucky to be able to moderate this session with our panelists, hear about their journey, vision, ambition. But don't forget, to those tuning in, you also have a chance to ask them your questions, so drop them in the chat below. So I'd like to start with Memory. Okay, so Memory, Okay, got a memory. In case you drop off, we will get you back. So memory, your journey from witnessing your sister's marriage at the age of 11 to becoming the executive director of the Foundation for Girls and Leadership Malawi and a renowned advocate for gender equality is truly inspiring. With the engine room working on designing this road to 2100 and to drive urgent action for SDGs, for young people, and prepare for the next agenda beyond 2030, whose voices and why do you believe that these need to be brought closer to the global stage to make it a truly inclusive future?
Well, thank you so much, Daddy, and my apologies that I can't open my screen because I really have a bad network. I might drop off. I mean, like, I think for me, the critical, individuals to be brought closer to this movement for me. I'm looking at the girls themselves because I work in an area where girls are extremely marginalized. They are excluded in many development work. So for me, really, when it comes to if we are to advance the global agenda on equality, is that we have to move to actually put at the center of our programming the girls themselves. We have to put them of our programming into in a sense that when it comes to investing, we have to invest in girls as well as the young women, so that we leverage on the power that they actually already have. And it's also very key that we have to make sure that youth-led movements are actually well funded, because I mean we have like from all the voices that have spoken so far, I've heard a lot of collaborating with young people, collaborating with youth-led movements, and that should actually be key in our work if we actually to advance the world agenda of ensuring that we make a brighter future for all the upcoming, this generation and the next generation.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Memory. Hopefully we can get your video working. So Neil, your work in nurturing new stories of grassroots leadership, particularly through the Refugee Youth Peace Ambassadors, and she leads Kakuma, is remarkable. Could you share your experiences with shaping new visions for the future, especially when they seem so distant, when they seem so far away, when they're hard to imagine? What is your process? What do you go through to actually picturize what can become a reality? What is ambitious? What is it that needs to happen now? And what are some lessons that the engine room members can draw from when they're talking about this future for 2100?
Thank you, Nandini. Very good to be part of these conversations. Amazing seeing a lot of young people joining today who are very, engaged and leading the way in their communities. My community leadership and activism journey started during my high school years. One afternoon, I invited my classmate to a storytelling circle under a small tree in Kakuma Refugee Secondary School where I was attending school. That afternoon, we talk about our stories, we talk about our dreams, we talk about our hopes for the future. And that session marked the founding of the Refugee Peace Ambassadors. Every Wednesday, we would gather for similar sessions, and more young people start joining our sessions. And we start running different activities that members were interested in, from leadership workshops to peace building, training, mentorship sessions, storytelling circles, and sport activities. By the end of just 1 year, over 1,000 young people participated in the different activities that we're organizing across the refugee camp. And we expanded our programs to include the broader community by organizing community dialogue that would bring together young people, community elders, religious groups, women groups, and members of the nearby host community. Everyone has a key role to play in bettering our community situations in the refugee camp. As a group, we saw that a few young women and girls were participating in our activities, in different activities that we're organizing across the refugee camp, and that inspired us to start She Leads Kakuma, which worked toward addressing those barriers and helping young women and girls take advantage of leadership, community, and education opportunities in the refugee camp. from the onset, community and young people were at the center of our work. Hebron has a role to play in every step we take as a community-led and youth-led organizations. This paved the way for intergenerational solidarity and youth leadership. We work with young people, train them as leaders in their communities, train them on leadership and advocacy, and give them an opportunity to run leadership and advocacy activities in the community. Inclusion was key to everything we're doing. The future must include everyone, as we all know, and that has to start today in how we organize, in how we advocate. At Shilit Kakumen, the Refugee Peace Ambassadors, we created a safe and inclusive space for everyone in the refugee camp to engage in conversation happening in the communities. Our global conversation must include all voices in all our intersectional diversities and identities and lived experiences, including those living in a refugee camp and other marginalized communities that are not often represented in this conversation and who we miss a lot from. And I think the last point I want to add to this is that we have to bring everyone on board. At Shilit Kakumen, the Refugees Peace Ambassadors, something we did is every single day we try to bring all the stakeholders on board in Kakuma refugee camp, the local stakeholders, as well as beyond. And I think this is something we need to do as well in being able to the way into the future. We have to ensure that every single person has a role to play in building the agenda for 2100. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Neil. I think it's absolutely incredible to how you have managed to actually build leadership, identify opportunities, encourage, mentor young people, and also showcase how they actually have a voice, leadership, accountability, and where they can actually be heard and contribute. It's incredible. Thank you. So moving on to our next panelist, Frank. As part of the International Red Cross, which plays an immense and pivotal role in humanitarian efforts globally, obviously, you have the understanding of how to plan for the future while there are multiple crises and impossible situations. So given the types and different types of magnitudes of crises and challenges that we see today, whether that is war, conflict, food insecurity, climate, migration, and many more, how do you focus your energy, or how do you convince the world even to focus their energy and priorities towards young people and towards the future of young people? And how do you talk about how do we balance out addressing the urgent needs of today for planning and with the urgent needs of today with the planning for the future as well? Like where does that balance lie for you?
Thank you very much. And I feel so privileged to be here. I've heard several times 50% are under 30. So I belong to the other side of the world population. But listening now for the last 1.5 hours here, now I understand also why this is called an engine house, because the inspiration I got here from all the panelists and the speakers, that is quite amazing. And if you ask me what keeps us going, exactly this, what we've been hearing here the last 1.5 hours, all the examples and all the stories, that is what keeps us going here. And you rightly said, the world is not in the best status. We turn on the news and what we see is conflict. We see the climate crisis, not only the climate crisis, we see the impact of the climate crisis. We see migration, we see displacement, we see unemployment, food insecurity, but also the polarization and the societal splits between poverty and rich, and it gets always worse and worse. And all we have to take care of this now. That is the task which everybody expects. When you see a Red Cross or a Red Crescent, everybody expects that we are handling these situations now and help people in these situations. And this is not a question about dealing something now or doing something for the future. If you do something now, you also do something for the future, because all what we do now has a future impact. And one of the things is, if we want to do something for a better world in the future and have young people living in a better future, we also need to engage with young people now. So for us, it is very important that when we see these situations which we're currently seeing, and we're coming to the community level, and we want to engage and have an impact, we are engaging with the communities there. We are planning together with the communities, and that includes young people. We are including young people in the planning, in the programming, so that they are impacted by this. We're also having programs where we specifically ask young peoples in the communities and across all political systems and everywhere, where we are asking them, what are the needs in your communities? And we're providing them with seed funding. And then we see that there's amazing programs are being made. We are mentoring them. We are providing them with capacity building, strengthening elements, but it is all by the young people. They are the ones who initiate these programs and processes and then bring them forward. And that is quite amazing to see what is happening, the innovative power we see there, the impact on the communities we can see there. And that is all things which we are doing now to have an impact now on the issues and problems people are facing now. But that also has then a future impact, because these are the ways of when societies can regroup and plan their own future.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Frank. So I do have a question that is to all the panelists to hear a bit more from you actually also on considering the agency to lay the foundations for a brighter future. If I had to give you a rapid fire to say, what are the immediate actions you believe we need to invest in today that are necessary, what would those be for you? First part. Second part, how can we encourage young people, but more importantly, the UN to embrace these actions for long-term thinking, implementation, and capacity building? And the last part to this is, more than the UN, how do we convince the banks to invest in today for our future tomorrow? So what are rapid fire, if I start with memory, what are the immediate actions we need for today? How do we convince young people? How do we convince the UN? And finally, how do we get banks to give us some financing and money?
Well, I think first and foremost, for me, the biggest thing that I think we can, moving forward, that we can invest in is actually leveraging much more in innovation for transformation. Through our wake, you know how like the world has really become diverse in such a way that, for instance, like if in Malawi we're learning as young people, we are learning a campaign, for instance, it's going to be a global campaign by the end of the day. So for young people in Africa, for young women in Africa, I think there is much more need for, investing in innovation. Like how do we young people empower our communities through innovative approaches. And at the same time, I think the other concept that is quite that has quite worked for me in my way is the concept of shifting power. Where if we continue with our work shifting power from from generation to generation, and as young people we are shifting power to the next to these young people, we will be able to continue our communities that are transforming the nations, that are transforming the impact of our global wake. And at the same time, the other one is also capital on localization. How do we empower its movements? To make sure that we continue building up the localization concept, so that it is, citizen empowered. The citizens are actually empowered. So at all levels, I think these would be my three key issues that we can take on board moving on.
Perfect. Thank you. Neil?
Thank you. I think Memory mentioned a lot of very important action items. I think for me, two things. I think first, we need courageous leadership to build a brighter future. And I think for that to happen, young people must lead the way in every way possible, not just in small committees and advisory boards here and there. I think that is a big limitation in itself. And I think this should be complemented by intergenerational solidarity and allyship. I think over the years, we've seen groups like, for example, the Elders is studying in solidarity with young people as they lead the way into a more just, peaceful, and sustainable future. And I think there's need for more spaces and collaboration like this within the United Nations and beyond. And I think secondly, the United Nations system is country-centered. And to me, I have had the opportunity to engage within the UN over the last few years. I think this is a big limitation in itself. There's a very small room for civil society groups to engage and lead at the United Nations. And I think this must change. I personally think it's very challenging to trust, countries that are often going the opposite way in dictating our future. I think we need the future belong to all of us. And these countries no longer represent our collective and interest as humanity. We need more mobilizations in all our diversities and envision the future for the year 100 together. And I think, to me, something that I think is crucial is that indigenous and feminist movement must lead the way, because they represent so many of the values that we stand in today as humanity, and helping us build a more just, peaceful, and sustainable future for ourselves and generation to come.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And Frank, I will let you have the last on this question.
Yes. First of all, I believe that investing in education, but not only in the formal education, it's about also building the real citizens' critical thinking, ethical empowerment, and investing in these skills into young people, and very, very early on. That is key, because then you start also to believe and think and know that you can change things, and that is key and important. We also need to have more dialogue. We need to have more platforms like we're having here, learning from each other, learning from old to young, but also from young to old. And that is what Nihal also was alluding to have more youth members and young people in decision-making positions, also in institutions like mine. We have these, but it's not very easy. And to get younger people in the decision-making powers here, that is very key. And the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, but also in other civil society institutions, and also in the UN, to have young people in there, that is in there. And therefore, we need also certain policy changes which need to be done to allow this, and not to have that process of starting somewhere as a young volunteer and then moving up and moving up and moving up, and then you're finally over 50, and then you are in a decision-making power. That needs to change. Your question about banks, how to get all this funding, because that is what I said, we are providing funding for young people, because at the end, you need money. You need money to start your programs, and even if it's just micro programs. And I don't know about banks, but I think we have some experience now with institutional donors. And that's not easy, because the institutional donors have reporting systems built up to move 10 million. But if it's about 500 or 1,000, it is quite different. And also, these reporting systems are made for an institution to report back. But you need to have also simplified reporting systems also for young people to do this. And that is what we need to engage with institutional donors, also potentially with banks, that there are other ways of doing these things. That you have also to invest in these young people for this reporting requirements, and to have trust and belief. It is easy to get 10 million for a risky investment somewhere, but we should also be able to get 500 or 1,000 into a local run project from some youth engagement community perspectives, because the risk is not very big, but that is where we need to move forward. So my plea is that we jointly, civil society, UN, we are all working together towards making these policy changes, that we can have this funding into youth engagement stronger. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you to each one of our speakers for your valuable insights. I would like to close the session, but with one final question, with literally it's 2 sentences, maybe less, but what would be that final piece of advice that you would like, or that you would wish to leave the engine room with? Memory, I'll start again with you. Okay, we might have lost Memory.
I think, no, I'm here, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think, I mean, like for me, I think let's keep on, dreaming big for our countries, for the world. I think, and the other one that I kind of like these days is it's always really beautiful to be a part of something that is bigger than us. I know, like, each one of us, if we continue working, building the better world that we are envisioning right now, the real things that we continue to do and all that, they're really contributing to something that is bigger than ourselves. And let's continue doing that. Let's, keep on inspiring each other. And yeah, I mean, one step at a time, we will be changing the world and moving towards the brighter future that we want. So I think that's my key takeaway and approach to the engine room. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Neil?
I think we need, locally led movement, community led movements, youth led movements to lead the way. I think we need to see more local, initiatives that are led by indigenous people. Indigenous knowledge is key to some of these challenges that we're trying to solve, from climate change to a lot of all these issues. Feminist movement as well. There's very little room for this movement to engage and lead at the United Nations, and I think that is something that has to change. We need to give power to this movement. So locally led, community led, youth led.
And finally, with Frank, what would your last piece of advice be for us?
Not to give up, and not to get bogged down with the situation, how the world is now. We are here together to make that change. And with this energy in the room, I believe that we can make the changes. And I fully agree with Neil and with my other speakers here. It is about empowering the young people and to bring the ideas up and to listen and get my generation to listen to you and not to let you down if we don't do this immediately, but be forceful and be loud and make yourself heard. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much to all our speakers. This was incredible as a panel. I don't think I wrote enough that I could, but some of our key things was investing in innovation for transformation, shifting the power of decision-making towards young people. And that's something that maybe we can learn from the example that Jake shared with us in the earlier panel, but also increasing CSO action in the UN. And hopefully the Summit of the Future will set a precedence for that going forward. Bringing in indigenous voices, bringing in feminist movements, that being the future, investing in education, skill building, and jobs from a very young age for young people, but also for us to invest, for people to invest in young people is also convincing institutions to simplify your reporting. Don't make it so complex. And for the engine room, guys, it's time to be part of something bigger, to envision the future, to inspire people, but mostly don't give up. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Ines to take us forward for the closing comments. Thank you very much, everyone.
Wow, what a launch it has been. Thank you, Nandini, Niall, Memory, and Frank for closing us off with that panel. I saw people joining in the chat from Thailand, Austria, Rwanda, Malawi, Maldives, Nepal, Afghanistan, India, and so many more countries, with speakers from so many different walks of life taking action. And I also saw some of our Unlock the Future partners active in the chat. Jacob from the Global Student Forum, Stefania from the Youth Road Safety, Hannah from the Scouts, who actually just shared an answer to one of the questions as a resource in the chat. So thank you for that. And without you, this mobilization wouldn't be possible. Without every single one of you who joined the call today, whether you joined us from the start or midway through, thank you for being with us today. As we reach the end of our time together for the launch of 2024 Engine Room, this is certainly not the end, but the beginning of an incredible year of action, innovation, and inspiration. And we can't wait to see you every step along the way. Ananya was sharing in the chat at the start of this call, it's my first time here. How would I be able to make connections and get more involved? So here is your answer. For those of you wondering, you can get yourself a front row seat to this journey, and it's very simple. First of all, sign up to the Engine Room, not just this event. If you haven't already, sign up via our website, and this will ensure that you're the first to know when registration opens for our first deep dive spotlight session on April 26th. So you can see that on the slide right now. The link will be shared in the chat. Make sure you're signed up. Also, today marks the launch of our Engine Room Youth Survey. Complete it and champion it amongst your networks to ensure that young leaders around the world have their voice heard in the road to 2100. If you want to brush up on the basics and deep dive into thinking behind the road to 2100 and what the Summit of the Future is, check out our common agenda decoded for your bite-sized insights into all the details. And again, these links are in your chat. And when in doubt, come to the Engine Room website where you'll find all the information you need on pit stops, spotlights, and our action group. So also you can write to us on our Instagram page and Twitter pages, LinkedIn as well, for those of you who use LinkedIn too, and I'm sure we'll have those details for you. But as we are ready to dive into the Engine Room for the future, the adventure is starting now, and we would love to hear from you if you are in. Are you 100% in? Are you excited? Do you want to learn more about it? What do you need from us to jump in? So the poll will pop up on your screen, and as you are responding to that, we would love to end, as we are used to, with a young artist that will be talking to us and doing a performance for us today. Switch Brillo, who is simply known as Switch, is a 24-year-old singer-songwriter based in New York City, and she moved to the United States at the age of 5. Her first exposure to Western music was a deep immersion in classic folk, blues, pop, and country, and her music chronicles her identity as a first-generation immigrant. She brings a heartbreaking warmth to her music that invites you to explore the universal in the personal through the lens of someone finding themselves within the world and within music. Switch will be releasing her first EP in the fall of 2024, so this is just a preview, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome her to the Engine Room stage as we close off this call. Switch, over to you.
Thank you so much, Inez. Hi, everyone. What an incredible event this has been. And thank you again to the Engine Room team for putting this together and to everyone tuned in. So to close things off, I'd like to introduce a song that embodies a spirit of perseverance and that spirit of hope. And at the core of its lyrics is kind of finding that optimism in the face of adversity. And I think it really highlights the resilience that defines our generation, especially during such a complex time. And touches on this continued shared journey that we're all in. So I hope this song encourages us to lean to ourselves and our dreams as young people and to find solace and strength that we're not alone in the shared pursuit of a better future. So with that being said, I hope you enjoy my rendition of Cough Syrup by Young the Giant.
Losing my mind, losing control. These fishes in the sea, they're staring at me. Whoa, whoa. A wet world aches for a beat of a drum. Whoa. If I could find a way to see this straight, I'd run away to some fortune that should I found by now. I'm waiting for this cough syrup to come down, come down. Life's too short to even care at all. I'm coming up now, coming up now out of the blue. These zombies in the park, they're looking for my heart. A dark world aches for a splash of the sun. If I could find a way to see this straight, I'd run away to some fortune that I should have found by now. And so I run out to the things they say could restore me, restore life the way it should be. I'm waiting for this cough syrup to come down. Life's too short to even care at all. I'm losing my mind, losing my mind, losing control. If I could find a way to see this straight, I'd run away to some fortune that I should have. I found by now. And so I run out to the things they say could restore me, restore life the way it should be. I'm waiting for this cold syrup to come down. One more spoon of cough syrup now. One more spoon of cough syrup now.